You know what? I was going to talk about the comments by Dr. Henry Kissinger today about Ukraine because I think that they're very important and they're indicative of a broader trend of the Western elites moving away from Ukraine and recognizing reality. But I can't. This shooting in Texas, even though you would think, oh, well, it's a local news story. You know, I normally talk about global geopolitics or economics. Why would I push aside comments by Henry Kissinger that have implications for the war in Ukraine over some school shooting, which school shootings are important, but they're at the most it's domestic U.S. news. Well, it's not because I think this particular shooting is of such great importance, but because I think it's clear at this point there's going to be a lot of shootings this year. It is an election year. Whether the spike is real or imagined, whether it is the result of just media hype or not, the fact of the matter is that shootings are in the news a lot during election years in the United States. And they're always politicized, no matter what. Assuming that they make the news. Shootings that aren't politicized, they just don't talk about. There are plenty of shootings, every week in America. There are mass shootings. Most of them don't get talked about because most of them are politicized. The ones that you do hear talk about are the ones that get politicized. They're the ones that the media feels like they can, use to grind their axe. So we had the Buffalo shooting, got lots and lots of coverage, but that shooting on the same day in I think it was Orange County, California, had a lot less coverage. It was Asian on Asian violence, even though it was Chi-Com on Taiwanese violence. But nevertheless, it was there, it happened. I don't know exactly what the reason is, but these sorts of events accelerate when we get closer to elections. And so I don't think that this is the end. We have now this shooting in Texas. 14 children. That is what's trending on Twitter. 14 children have been killed. That is something that the media is not going to let go. And I don't say this like, oh, only the media could care that 14 children die. That's not what I mean at all, obviously. 14 children dying, that's very bad. But when 14 children get killed on a weekend in Chicago, for obvious reasons, you don't hear that talked about. So I don't know if they're going to use this for like a gun control thing, which really is a dead end at this point in America. I don't know if they're going to continue it to say, oh, well, this is the white supremacy thing. This is more white supremacy. I think they're going much more with that than the gun thing lately, because they're trying to push censorship, because they're trying to push mass surveillance, and which we already have mass surveillance in the United States, but they want to ramp it up even more. They want to completely destroy any right to privacy that we have left, any tolerance for political dissidents. They will label all political dissidents white supremacists, even if you're not white. I've talked about this before. I haven't figured anything out. I haven't found any evidence yet. But you gotta be a fool to think that these mass shootings all of a sudden just by coincidence all materialize during election years. And while there's lots of them, like I said, that the media doesn't jump on, that the media isn't able to exploit, there always seems to be plenty of them during an election year that fit into the media narrative. And if they don't exactly fit into the media narrative, the media finds a way to adapt them into that narrative. And in the past, I've flirted with the idea that there is some kind of broader conspiracy around this. Why is it that they're able to find that there are so many lone wolves who suddenly materialize around election time? Is there, is this the result of potential FBI provocation like we used to see with Islamic terror plots? The FBI or the federal government in general always used to brag about, oh, look, we foiled this Islamic terror plot, and it turned out to be an entrapment operation, just like the Whitmer, the Whitmer hoax, where the FBI, found some disaffected young man who happened to be Arab or perhaps even a practicing Muslim, and said, hey, kid, You know, we know you're really down and your girlfriend broke up with you and, you know, you're mad at the world. But you know what would make that your life a lot better? Martyring yourself for Allah. And they, you know, talk these kids into, okay, here's how you build a bomb, and you go do it. And then, you know, at the last second, the FBI swoops in and goes, ha, tricked you. And pat themselves on the back for foiling a terror plot that never would have existed without their involvement. Totally entrapping some kid who never would have thought of being a terrorist if not for the FBI constantly coming and prodding them. There was one particular, from this era, one particular story, and I don't want to get too off on the past, but it's important background, where the FBI found this suicidal young Muslim kid, and he just wanted to kill himself. And the FBI, of course, was encouraging that, but saying, no, you need to take down other people with you. And pushing him, no, go commit a mass shooting, or go blow people up, and then kill yourself. That's much better for Allah. At least then you'll be doing something good with your life if you're going to throw it away anyway. And the guy, you know, repeatedly would just say back to them, no, I don't want to take down other people with me. I just want to... And you know, when all this came out later on, it was just an example of how depraved these people are and what they will do. Take somebody, try and manipulate someone who's suicidal into agreeing to go murder other people, you know, before killing himself, just so they can then, you know, swoop in at the last second and arrest them and throw them in prison for the rest of their lives. Most Americans, I don't think really, most Americans for a fact do not recognize that this goes on. I think that the Whitmer case is the most high-profile example of it yet. That, of course, happened during an election year. It was like a month or two before the election. I called it at the time on this channel. And so when I see all of these shootings that go off... oh, I forgot, before I get to that. There were examples. Plenty of examples in the past, more than we know, probably, where the FBI did this sort of thing. Where they tried to entrap someone. And they waited too long to go in and try and bust them. And so what ended up happening? The person who the FBI radicalized ends up going and committing this atrocity before getting arrested. And normally this comes out in the form of, you know, the phrase that we normally hear is that, oh, the suspect was known to the FBI. It's normally what they say. Oftentimes what that means is that the FBI had groomed this person to be a terrorist. But at least in theory, they didn't intend for them actually to commit that terrorist act. If you look into the Oklahoma City bombing, you'll learn a lot about how this stuff worked, because believe it or not, before 9/11 and before the moral panic around Muslims, there was a moral panic back then about gun nuts and white supremacists back in the 90s. That was, in fact, what the Patriot Act was originally written, you know, supposedly by Joe Biden. I'm sure, you know, it was written for him but handed to him, but it was Joe Biden's bill, what became the Patriot Act, and it was brought up, I think, in 1995 by Joe Biden, in the wake of Oklahoma City, perhaps, or maybe it was another incident. They had a few of those back then, in order to crack down on, you know, white supremacist, separatist, sovereign citizens, Second Amendment advocates, all those sorts of people. And, of course, it later comes out that a lot of those activities, a lot of those, you know, whole militia groups were invented, essentially, founded, and mostly populated by federal agents of different agencies. Sometimes you had different federal agencies honeypotting their own agents, as I believe happened, if I remember correctly, in the case of Oklahoma City with, what was the name of it? It was like a compound in out in the middle of nowhere. It was like some white separatist community. It was completely not only infiltrated by the feds, but pretty much run by the feds. And so knowing all this, knowing this history, knowing that our government does these things, creates these people, creates the risks that they will commit these atrocities, and knowing that in the past they have accidentally to be as charitable to them as possible. They've accidentally let some people through who ended up carrying out these attacks. When I see these sorts of attacks spike around elections, I start to seriously consider the possibility that this is a deliberate act. And not necessarily that I think the government knows each individual person who's going to commit an attack like this before it happens, but I think that perhaps, because of course we're not privy to this, we mere mortals, it's not like I can go look at their records and know what they're doing. They wouldn't tell us if we asked. So we have to speculate on what these federal agencies are doing with our taxpayer dollars. It seems to me that they increase their efforts to radicalize individuals around election time, that they do more of this than usual because we see more of these lone wolf terrorists materializing. And their terror, most often, is helpful to the narrative of establishment politicians. And so I'm not saying that each individual shooter you see is like on the FBI payroll. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is I think the FBI is going out there, doing more of these activities, interacting with more people online, trying to spread sort of an ideology of radicalization, infiltrating these groups, encouraging them to commit violent acts, just sort of throwing the bait out there. Think of it that way. Think of it like chumming the waters. That's probably a good analogy. You're out on a fishing boat, you're cutting up a bunch of fish, you got all these bloody fish, and you're throwing them out buckets into the water, and that's attracting sharks. And so that's not the same as like going up to a shark and saying, hey, go eat that guy who's treading water over there. But when you're throwing chum into the water, and forgive me if I'm not using the terminology correctly, I'm not a fisherman, but if you're chumming the water and you see that there's people swimming around your boat, you can't exactly play innocent when one of those people, or a couple of those people, start to get attacked by sharks. You are setting the sharks off. You are encouraging them to prey on innocent people. And so when it's known that you've done something like this repeatedly and consistently over the past few decades, when people start randomly getting attacked by sharks in the water, and there's not a clear reason why, and we start to see clusters of shark attacks at certain areas and at certain times, don't you think that the guy who's known to chum the waters when there's people swimming would be a prime suspect? Because based on past actions, it seems like something that person would be responsible for, or those people. And so forgive me if I'm not sounding quite clear. I'm trying to be careful in my words, because I don't want to go too far. I don't want to say something that is just false. I don't want to just make up accusations. I'm trying to deduce, based off of what we know, a potential explanation. This is just one theory as to what could be causing certain social phenomena, I guess you'd call it. I think that's a sterile term, social phenomena. These individualized terror attacks on small groups of people. And so if I'm correct, if I'm onto something here, we're going to see more of this. This is going to continue until the election. After the election, we'll probably get a pause, just like we did in 2021. In 2020, there was weird stuff that happened. We got things like the Whitmer kidnapping, and I'm sure I'm off in terms of the numbers. In terms of, if you just looked up statistically, how many mass shootings occurred? The number could be pretty flat throughout the years. They don't necessarily, I'm not saying that they statistically spike during election years. What I'm saying is that the types of shootings that the media can exploit to promote their agenda spike during election years. On paper, those shootings will look the same as mass shootings that occur in poor urban communities that are never talked about. 14 kids getting shot at a school in Texas on paper will look the same as 14 kids or young people or whatever getting shot in a trap house in Chicago. I don't know, do they still call them trap houses? But obviously, the political potency of one is far greater than the other. And so when you see more politically potent terror attacks, because I won't limit it just to shootings, clustered in an election year in which the media can then use that as an opportunity to try and tug at the heartstrings of voters and say, here, this is why you should vote Democrat. It's quite suspicious. So I guess you could call this my warning to you. I think we've got a lot more terror attacks left to unfold this year. So with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.